Welcome back to the last of AI Pathfinding. So this is number 3 with the best version, in my opinion, the best version, because this is the most complex one, a little bit more setup necessary. But as you can see, the conga line, this is one of your comments because it's actually true, it is one conga line. Of course, you can remedy this a little bit, but they get out of this kind of pathfinding, they get out of even the most tricky situations. And then of course they update, which is the best part, and then as you can see, works pretty nicely. So if you want to know how to do this in GameMaker Studio, so this is the ultimate thing. And by the way, I guess this is the one thing which they actually use in Hotline Miami, not my series, but I guess generally, then stay tuned. This is One Up Indie. I am a developer, so if you like what you're seeing, hey, why not consider sharing, liking and subscribing. And why do I say that? Well, because this is boosting the YouTube algorithm. That's why I'm just asking you. I don't say this to annoy you every time. Alrighty, let's start this thing. So what do we need for that? Basically just 2 things and optionally 3 things. First of all, a little controller which is just sitting somewhere, wherever, so we can have a nice grid. And then second of all, the things which we want to input. So basically enemies which you want to have, and then you can just put as many as you like, it doesn't really matter, this is then up to you. And then one setup object which is sitting somewhere, because we need to establish kind of a system, and then on that system all the little grid enemies can write on it. So here what do we have? Basically everything which we need. I just cleared it out so you can actually check it out. And then, well, first of all, let's get rid, so you can see the whole thing. So first of all, on our instances or wherever, we put our pathway. So basically this is the one object which is sitting there. This is the controller, so this is number 1. And then, well, our enemies, I already placed them, so hopefully you understand what's going on. I guess this shouldn't be too difficult. And then let's set up our pathway. So the first thing which we need to do is, for example, if you have this room, so what you're seeing here, for example, here you can actually toggle a grid by itself, but this is just for helping you out so things kind of snap to it. So this is one thing. So for example, if your grid is 16 by 16, so here you can actually define it, and this is nicely done. I would recommend that you set up your room 16 by 16, and therefore we can apply the grid at the same kind of structure, so a 16 by 16 thing. So first of all, what do we need? First of all, we need to create a grid. So you can completely forget the depth. This is just because I want to show you something in a few seconds. And then what we can do is go MP grid, because there is actually another grid. So there's also DS grid, but we're using the MP one because this is the one which we want to formulate. So MP grid, and then we say create. And here quite a lot of things which we need to put in. And for example, we can actually open this one, and this is the official one. Then we have a lot of things which we need to put in. So top left, here we can just go 0 and 0. So what does that mean? Well, because we want our grid to start at this point. For example, if you just need it at another position, then you can set it up differently. But I would say 0, 0 is definitely good and fine. And then it says H cells and V cells. So this means how many cells are we actually having. And here, because my room is set up to be room width by 16, so we can just say, hey, the whole room width divided by 16, and then the room height also divided by 16. Then we got the amount of horizontal cells and the vertical cells. Yeah, that's actually right. I just needed to think about it. And then of course it says, hey, how big our cells. So they are 16 by 16, and basically we set it up. And now this is basically just do nothing. It's just saying like, hey, we create a grid. So we just say grid and say, and assign it to it. And then for example, we say like, hey, the grid needs to be a little bit more specific, because we want our enemies to kind of go around these things. So for example, here, just take away the walls. So you can see here, these are instances. They are called wall horizontal or wall vertical or whatever. And then I have a higher hierarchy, which is just object wall parent. So basically they are all inheriting from this object, and therefore we want to bounce and have this kind of as a structure, and then later on you will see what I mean. So basically we need something so the enemy has to go around these walls as an obstacle. So therefore we just say MP grid, and then add instances. You can actually go rectangles or cells or whatever. For example, you can go input single ones, but for us it's a little bit more easy. We just say, hey, the ID, then my object. This is of course then here wall parent, because this is including all of them. And then you can say like precise, but for us it's not a matter. For example, here I gave my enemies just a rectangle. I guess it's 16 by 16, is it? I guess now it's even smaller, so they do fit in here. So once again, if you're creating such a maze or whatever, don't make it 16 by 16 and then the enemy the same, but then sometimes they can get stuck in here and then they cannot go precisely in there. That's why it's a good rule of thumb to make them a little bit smaller, just one thing. So basically now we have set it up. Basically we created our grid, and then we just added the wall instances on what obstacles we are having, and then basically this is pretty much done. And then what we can actually do is draw that thing. So we can say actually MP grid, this is in the draw event, draw, and then our grid. And now what will be happening? So for example, if we start it, we can put that back on. So let's start it. Alrighty, so what you're seeing here, this already is kind of showing you, for example, this is basically just already drawing the grid, but as you can see, it's drawing rectangles, and the green ones are where we can go, and then the red ones is where we're not supposed to be going. So basically this is if we are drawing the grid on the screen. Please don't do that, because this is taking quite a lot of performance out of the game. And interestingly, for example, if I zoom out, this is actually out of the room, but it doesn't really matter because I kind of cheated in here with the background. This is the background which is getting drawn out of that. So this is where we are going, and basically we just need to put it somewhere in the room, and then we can basically forget this object pathway thing because we don't need it. But let's make it a little bit more transparent to see, and therefore we just go and make a draw set alpha to 0.3, so you can actually see it nicely in the room, and then we just close it because we don't need it anymore. Alrighty, so let's go into our enemies and basically plant them everywhere in the room. Of course, don't put them on top of the wall, because I guess then they are stuck and then they cannot move. Actually, I haven't checked this out, but should make sense. So for that we need to make a few things so this stuff is actually working. So first of all, this is optional. We just define a target. So for example, for me, we need to go some X and Y positions. Of course, if you just go on a specific coordinate, you don't need a specific object like my player here, and then you can completely forget that. But here I think this makes the most sense. Then the next thing is we need to update our path or have one path, and therefore we create a little nice variable and say like path as. For now this is doing nothing, it's just adding a path into memory, and then it's doing nothing with it because, well, that's pretty much it. And then what we can do is update that path, and then for example update it. So for example, if our player is going somewhere, so player going somewhere, then we are updating the path to it specifically. But I guess in step event this is quite resource consuming, and therefore we can make it a little bit neater if we just loop the alarm and do that just a few times and not every step. So basically 60 times per second, that's a little bit of an overkill, because if you have more than one enemy, let's say you're 30 or 40 or whatever, then I guess this could well, reduce your performance at some point significantly, and therefore just say like, nah, let's make this a little bit nicer. So the first thing which we want to do is we want to loop our alarm. So let's say every 2 seconds we are updating the position where we want to go. Of course here, if you need it a little bit more specific, go with lower refresh times. Basically this is just updating. Then the next thing is we need to delete the last pass and then update it to the new one. For example, what isn't actually happening. So for example, if you just say like, hey, if you just changed how the path is, it's kind of wonky, and therefore we just say like, alrighty, delete the last path and create a new one. So this is one thing. And then for example, we need to, of course, give it new coordinates where to go. And then here we're just saying like, hey, target. And now we come to the magic part. I guess this is the most thing. We want to write on the grid, which we have created now. So we just say like, hey, use the grid. And therefore we just say MP grid and then path. And what this is doing, it's basically linking the path which we have created now, and then our path here is empty, there's nothing in there, it's not going anywhere, just saying like, hey, where do we want to go? And then we say like, hey, link our path, and then the ID, this is basically, hey, what kind of grid, what are we using? Of course, you can have multiple ones, then we just use the grid which we're having in our setup. So I just quickly copy paste that in, the grid, then we're using our path, and then we have linked the path with our grid together. And then we say like, hey, where are we starting? And then of course here we're just using our current X and Y position, and then say, hey, where do we actually want to go? Then we say to put that into our target. Of course here once again you can go with coordinates if you just have them want to go them in a specific direction. And then it says allow diagonal movement. Here basically here this is the little illustration from them. So here if you just say MP grid path, then this is just saying like, hey, if you allow grid diagonal movement, then you can go diagonal. If not, you go like this kind of stair movement. And this is just basically this, it. So for example here, it makes sense for us to go diagonally, and that's why we say 1 and allow it. For now, still nothing is happening, and therefore we just need to say like, hey, now we want to write on this specific path which we linked and then created, because now actually we're having one. And therefore we just say path start. And if you watched my other videos on path, then I guess you know. So we need to go, what kind of path are we using, on which one are we writing, what kind of speed are we using, so how fast, then what we do if we well, end up in our destination, and then absolute true if this is absolutely on the path. And then one thing, for example, what we can do also, this is of course optional, we can actually draw our path on which we are walking. So here draw path and needs a few parameters. So here once again, which path do we want to draw? So the one which we're having, then starting from our position, and then absolute. So basically once again the thing. And then for example, once we started, everything is set up, and this is basically it. Alrighty, so for example, what you're seeing now, you see those green lines. So this is well, the grid which has been drawn now a little bit more transparent. As you can see now, everybody is walking in the, the conga line. And then, well, this is just basically it, how the whole thing is here. And as you can see, they're just updating every 2 seconds, and therefore you see they're drawing a path to the last location where they want to go. And of course they update it, and then obstacles and stuff are not an issue. And of course, one thing which you see is they will cluster around, and then for example, they have no collision to each other, and therefore this is a thing which I'm gonna address in the Hotline Miami series. But for most games, this will be more than sufficient, because as you can see, this works already pretty decent. Alrighty, that was it. That was the pretty good AI pathfinding and using a grid. So basically, once again, setting up the grid once, and then setting up and updating the path in the alarm event. So we're looping this, and then we get this pretty decent result how to do that. And of course, one thing, for example, if you want to have a little bit more control, then later on you adapt how you want to handle the path. For example, if it's, for example, should be stopping, if it's, for example, some changes, because here once you set up the path, it will go for infinity. For example, if you just set it up once, then it won't be stopping, and therefore here this is where you take control in the AI region. Alrighty, without any further ado, that was it from my side. Hopefully you enjoyed this, and then you can use the best pathfinding, which is inside GameMaker Studio 2 and 1.4 and so on. Well, you can just use it, and well, it's easy to set up. Alrighty, that was it from my side. Have a good one. One up, Indie.